guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Reagan and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in July and August of this year. The beginning of 2024 was kind of slow for me in terms of reading because I was finishing up my last semester of college. So this summer I was finally able to get back into my kind of groove with reading and definitely was able to up my capacity of books that I read, because normally I read a few books a month, but there were some times in the beginning of 2024 where I would just read like one book a month, which is totally fine, but it's just not necessarily what I think I can do as a reader. Once I got back home from moving out of college and doing some travel in July, I was really able to pump up the amount of books that I was reading. So I'm going to be showing you all the books that I read in July and August because it's the most that I've read all year, which is super exciting. I also have read so many good books. A lot of these are 5 stars, which is insane because I don't think I'd give out 5 stars that easily. The first book that I read in July was Tender as the Flesh. I read this on my Kindle using the Libby app. There was no line in my library, which is one of the reasons why I picked this one up. And also because my friend had recently read it and rated it 5 stars on Goodreads. And I was just curious. I have seen so much about this online. It's kind of known to be really gross. And yeah, I was just curious about it. This book follows Marcos, who is living in a world where a virus takes out all of the animal population on Earth. Subsequently, the government legalizes cannibalism to produce human meat, which they call special meat, for consumption. Marcos works in a processing plant where they process and breed humans for eating. And yeah, you follow Marcos as he navigates this transition from animal meat to special meat. You're following his relationships with other people, with his family, what his work is, and you kind of see his descent into madness because he's not a fan of the whole special meat industry. This book was incredibly disgusting and gross, and I've never read a book that kind of made me feel such a strong, intense emotion of disgust before, and I think that that just really shows how well this book is written. And it's actually translated from Spanish, which is crazy because even in the translation it is nasty. It is so gross and unhinged. It's very detailed with the whole process of start to finish, how people are now being produced as meat. And yeah, it was gross. I had to take a lot of breaks from it just because of how nasty it was. A lot of times I'll read while I'm eating because, especially on my Kindle, I have this little stand in the back. I can just flip it up, eat my meal, click, eat my meal, click. I could not eat while reading this book. It was disgusting. It was nasty. So if that's something that you're not looking for in a book, I don't think you should read this. But if you are a little gross, a little weird, I think you would love this. I rated this one 4 stars because I just think it's so impressive when an author can evoke such a strong, visceral emotion from the reader. I think that that's just, you're so talented if you're able to do that, even if the emotion is disgust. It was just insane to me. I think that it's not 5 stars because the ending kind of threw me off a little bit. I think that the ending was great for the story, but I totally didn't see it coming, which is also great. It felt a little bit out of left field for me, and maybe I'm just missing something, but yeah, the ending, crazy, insane. I also do think that some parts dragged a little bit. It's definitely super enjoyable. I really liked it. 4 stars is a good book, and that I would recommend it. The next book that I read in July was Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I listened to this one on audiobook because Meryl Streep was the narrator for it, and I thought she did such an amazing job. I would say if you're into audiobooks and you want to have a really nice experience with an audiobook and with the narrator, because sometimes I think narrators can really ruin an audiobook for me. She was just so good. It felt like a whole production, even though it was just her voice, simply. She's so talented. It was awesome. Tom Lake is about Laura, who runs a cherry farm with her husband in Michigan. And during 2020, during COVID, her 3 daughters come back to stay and to live with them. While her and her daughters are passing the time picking cherries, she tells her life story to them. It all kind of leads up to when she dates this really, really, really famous actor. The story is told in basically 2 timelines, one during 2020 when she's there with her family, and that really explores their relationships together, but also the storyline of when she is telling this story about her life. I thought it was so good as an audiobook because you're hearing this person telling this story. It's like Meryl Streep is telling this to you, like you're one of the daughters. Throughout her life, Laura always plays this one character in this one play called Our Town. It goes throughout her life, starting at her very first play, I think, which is in high school, all the way up to Hollywood and Broadway, and finally at Tom Lake. You follow that story and also the story of basically how every choice that she made in her life kind of got her to where her and her daughters are in life, and just like one simple choice or one relationship could totally change your whole life. I rated this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was really good, but I didn't exactly feel connected to the characters in a way that I think I should have. I think that if I did, it would definitely be higher just because the whole book is character driven. And I really like the story, so that's why it's, above a 3. I think that maybe if I didn't read this as an audiobook, I might feel a little differently. And that's kind of like a theme that I'll be talking about in the rest of these books. I don't know. I thought that the audiobook was amazing, but maybe if I had read them as, words on paper, I would have liked the characters a bit more. I think that this would make an amazing, amazing movie just because of the whole timeline of like her life, but also talking to her daughters and all the different relationships and experiences that she had. Just, I could picture them so well in my mind. And also the setting of Michigan and the cherry farm was just so beautiful. I loved that. There's also a part, I think it's maybe a whole chapter, where one of the daughters talks about climate change and how that's influencing her life. And I just thought that that was so cool to read about. I went to school for environmental science, and climate change is something that I think about a lot. It was just really refreshing to see that in a book where the characters actually care and are making decisions based on that. I just thought that was really cool to see portrayed in the book. I do think that Ann Patch's writing is so pretty and lyrical, and I think that she does a really good job with dialogue and her whole kind of plot development. So I'd really be interested to read another book of hers. But yeah, 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite. I was just kind of listening to it, doing random things, and it was fine. It was great. The next book that I read in July was H is for Hawk. This is one of the New York Times best 100 books of the 21st century, if you guys have seen that list. It's not on the reader's choice, I think it's on the critic's choice, and this is actually the only book that I read off of that entire list, which is unfortunate because I know there's so many good books on there, obviously the best 100 books of the century, but to be honest, I don't know if this is one of the best books on that list. This is a memoir by Helen Macdonald, and in it she is grieving her father's death, and kind of a way to cope with that grief, she buys a hawk. She buys it for falconeering. You're hunting with a hawk. It's kind of a very old sport or hobby, but she adopts this hawk because she thinks that it's going to help with her grief and grieving her father, because as a child she was really connected with him and he was the one who kind of introduced her to nature and loving animals. I was really, really excited about reading this because I love nature sort of books, and I read this one book, I read this book when I was a kid, which is Leslie the Owl, and I loved it. One of my favorite books ever. I read it like a really long time ago, so maybe it doesn't still stand the test of time, but I thought it was so good. It is about a woman adopting an infant barn owl, and I thought it was just amazing. I really loved this one. And I kind of thought this was going to be the same thing, but just more literary, I guess, and kind of more emotional because she's using this hawk to help her with the grief of her father. I was disappointed by this one. I kind of thought it was going to be like Wesley the Owl, of her whole journey with this hawk, which it is. It is about that. And I really loved the parts where she wrote about the hawk, but I kind of missed the mark with me with her discussions of grief. I think that it really was great that she was able to kind of overcome this like depression and sadness that she felt because of the hawk, and I loved reading about that, but I think that it kind of was lost a little bit for me. Yeah, I don't know if this was essentially the book for me. Also, one thing that it doesn't say on the back, which this isn't like a spoiler, this is a memoir, and nothing really happens in it, but for so much of this book, she talks about, what's his name? She talks about T.H. White, who was the author of The Once and Future King. He's a famous author, and he wrote a book about having a hawk, the same hawk that she has, and she spends so much time talking about this book and talking about this man and kind of giving us like a book report on the book that she's talking about, and also talking about his life in so much detail that I felt like half of the book was about him and not about her. It's not on the back, so I thought that this was kind of misleading. I thought it was going to be about her journey with the hawk, but so much of it was about T.H. White. I don't know why, and I didn't really care. I thought that some of the parts about him were kind of funny, and yeah, like it's interesting to see how a person who's raising a hawk, when he doesn't know anything about hawks versus the person that does. But how does that help her get over her grief? I don't know. It was just, I didn't love those parts, and I felt like it was not, I don't know. I was disappointed by this one. So I gave this one 3 stars. I think that her depictions of nature are amazing. And yeah, I mean, it's a really cool story, but I was disappointed, which is sad. I thought this was going to be 5 stars. You win some, you lose some. The next book that I read was Fourth Wing, and I read this one on my Kindle again, and I think I only got it because it was Skip the Line. I said this in my last video, I don't love reading super hyped up books in the moment that they're really hyped up. I'm interested in them, but I'll wait a bit to read them. And that's what I did with Fourth Wing. And I eventually read Iron Flame, which I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, I was just intrigued. You know, I haven't read a fantasy book like Fourth Wing in a while. It kind of was reminiscent of my like middle school fantasy reading, which I really liked, honestly. I went into reading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame thinking that it was going to be a trilogy, because I don't know why I thought that. And I was like, oh, okay, I can read Fourth Wing now, Iron Flame immediately, and then I have to wait until January for the third one. That's fine. No, it's a 5-book series. I honestly don't know if I would have read these 2 books if I knew that. Because I just can't. Like, that's so much waiting. So much waiting. It's gonna take up the next like 4 years of my life or something. I don't even know. Anyways, if you were unaware, or if you're one of the few people on the internet who has not read Fourth Wing, there's this war college where when you turn 20, you can join one of the different sections in the war college. You could be like a scribe, which is essentially a librarian or an archive keeper, or you could be a healer, which is like a doctor, or you could be a rider, which rides dragons. And you're following Violet, who is basically forced into the dragon riding quadrant, and she is a small, frail little girl. First of all, I hate that. It's either the girls are the strongest women you've ever seen in your life, or the frailest, tiniest little girl ever in fantasy books. Like, why do they have to be these 2 people? You're just seeing her kind of survive the Rider's Quadrant because it's dangerous. You're working with dragons and all these other things. The book is so incredibly similar to Divergent, if you've read those. The whole quadrants is essentially the same thing as factions and choosing the different faction that you want to go into. And Dauntless is so similar to the Writer's Quadrant. They're all wearing black, they have to do this crazy thing in order to be like initiated into the section, and also you have like these different sparring matches, there's different trials that different teams have to go through, all these things. They were so incredibly similar to Divergent, almost like too similar. Like, could Rebecca Yarros come up with some original things, you know? There's a part in this book where they have to do the gauntlet, which is like an obstacle course, which is part of their training, whatever. That is just American Ninja Warrior. All the things that they're describing is doing, and like all the moves that they're doing and the obstacles are literally from American Ninja Warrior. And I was just like, the whole time I was reading the book, I was like, can you think of anything original? Anything? But yeah, it is a fantasy romance, and honestly, I love the romance in this one. I thought it was so good. And the book, while it's not the most well written, in my opinion, it's not a literary masterpiece by any means, I thought that it was so entertaining. I love the dragons, I thought they were hilarious, and I love the female and male main characters. I thought that they, like, the tension was so good. I rated this one 4 stars. It was so good, but there was just, you know, those moments in, I think, new, like, contemporary fantasies that I'm just like, oh, cringe. Why is there so much cringe? There's a whole star worth of cringe in there. And yeah, it was good. And it left on the most insane cliffhanger ever. So I had to read the second one. I had to, which I'll talk about in a minute. The next book that I read in July was My Side of the Mountain. This is a children's classic book, which I actually have never read before. I read it this month. And this book was given to me, which was super nice. It's super short. It's also really small. It's just like a cute little mini version. This book is about Sam, who is a little boy living in New York City with his family, and he's just tired of the hustle and bustle of New York, and he's tired of his family, and so he runs away to his family's property in the Catskill Mountains, and there he's just living on his own, living off the land. And I thought that it was just a really, really cute read. Sam is so knowledgeable for how old he is. I can't remember if he's like 11 or something. I'm so impressed by him. Definitely not realistic, or not something that I think kids could do in this day and age, but I think if I read this as a kid, I would absolutely love this and be like, okay, I'm running away tomorrow, which I don't think I ever did. I never ran away from home. It has these really, really sweet drawings inside that are done by the author. I really like the way that it was written too. I think that the depictions of nature in this one as well were just so good. And I loved all the little characters, all his little friends in the woods. I thought it was really good. I initially rated this, I think, 4.5 or 5 stars, but it doesn't really stick with me, and I think that I was just rating it that because of the end. Like, I was shocked by the ending a little bit. So now I think I would rate this 4 stars. Like I said, if I were a child, I think this would have really been life-changing for me, but, you know, I'm 22, so. But it was really good. I can totally see why it's a classic. Okay, this next one just might be my favorite read of the year so far. I don't know, that's kind of heavy though. That's kind of like a crazy thing to say about a book. I don't know. There's another one in this stack that I'm like, is that the best book that I've read? But I, Who Have Never Known Men. This blew me away. I have seen this on the internet as like a literary fiction thought daughter kind of book. And I love the cover. I saw this in the Boulder bookstore. It was on the staff recommendation kind of wall in there, and I just knew I had to have it. I was like, I've seen this everywhere. I've really been wanting to read this, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. It's only like 170 pages, and it flew by for me. This is a dystopian book where there are 40 women locked underground in a cage in a bunker, and they're guarded by men. None of them know what they're doing there, why they're locked up. They don't know how long they've been underground. They don't have any answers at all, and they've kind of lost interest in figuring out what happened to them, and they've lost interest in their past lives too, just because they've been down in the bunker for so long with no change. But there is one girl who is younger than all the rest. When they were first locked in there, she was like essentially a baby or a toddler, whereas all the other women were older, at least like 20 something. So there's a big age gap between 39 of the women and one girl. And they kind of are able to keep time based on how grown this one young girl is. And she's really isolated from the rest of them because she is growing up and she doesn't have her mother there or any of her family members there. And she's kind of alone, separated from the rest of them. And they won't really tell her anything about life or anything about relationships, love. So she's really on her own. One day, something happens where the whole book just kind of gets flipped on its head. And you're following the one young girl, and really what I loved most about this book was just her journey of discovering what it means to be a woman in a world where there are no men. Does it really mean anything to be a woman in a place where there's no other gender? She's really just discovering things about herself, her body, her life, through these other older women and also through the experiences that she's had. And I thought that this was so amazing. I've never really thought about the way that you discover that you are a woman in real life. You kind of like discover the intricacies and the meaning of being a woman over your life throughout other people and your experiences and stuff. But this girl, she realizes the kind of like complexities of being a woman all at random periods through asking questions, kind of all at once, honestly. I thought that was so cool to read about. I was on the edge of my seat for so much of this book, even though it's kind of calm. It's generally, like, I don't know how else to say this, but it's generally pretty chill. Nothing really happens. But the whole time I was like, oh my gosh, what is gonna happen? What is gonna happen? How is this book gonna end? Like, I don't know, like, oh my gosh. There's no chapters, it's really told as like a stream of consciousness. But I loved it so much because you're seeing how a woman is discovering like what life means and what it means to be a woman in such like a short amount of time, and through ways that we'll hopefully never be able to realize, because, you know, we're not locked underground with only men as guards. I really don't know how I can explain how this book made me think and feel. I was like crying at the end of this too. I think everyone should read this. I saw this in, what's his name? Jack Edwards. He said that this is going to be a modern day classic, and I totally agree. I think that everyone reading this will kind of maybe get something else different out of it, as like opposed to what I think, and I just think that that's so special. Highly recommend. This is 5 stars. It's so good. I wish I could tell you all the thoughts that I have about this, but I don't want to give anything away, so I just think that everyone should read this. The next book that I read in July was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a classic, kind of like required reading for, you know, daughters out there, whatever. My copy is so beat up. I got this secondhand, and you know, it has another girl's name in it. It's really kind of gross. There's not really a plot to this, but it follows Esther, who is this really talented girl, and normally her talent can kind of bring things to her, and she's able to fill her time, fill her life with these really great experiences. But this one summer, things don't really work out for her, and she doesn't really get things to go her way, and that sends her into a depression. I love this book because Sylvia Plath is just such an interesting person to me. This is kind of like a semi-autobiography. Some of the things that happened to Esther did happen to Sylvia Plath, and she puts her own life into her writing. And I think that Sylvia's story is just so tragic and beautiful. She's a really great writer. I think that the fig tree metaphor is just one of the most iconic and beautiful things ever written, and it's just so real and relatable. Also, like the bell jar too, even the name, the way that she describes that in her story, I thought was amazing. I didn't love this because of the story. I loved this because of the emotion that Sylvia Plath writes and is able to convey through Esther. And you know, you always think as a person that you're going through original experiences and going through original emotions. While I was reading this, I was like, oh my god, I have felt this way, but I've never read or heard of anyone feeling this way either. Like, I've never had an original experience or emotion ever. And she just really encapsulates kind of sadness and melancholy and feeling burnt out and, you know, useless. She's able to convey what other people feel and maybe not be able to express. Like, I felt that so many times when reading this book. I thought it was amazing. 5 stars, classic. And I think that this is such a great time for me to read this as well because, you know, I just graduated college. I don't have anything going on in my life. And, you know, that's kind of the same for her. It just feels validating to see that other people have these emotions and are going through the same things as you, even though this was written in the 50s, I think. Yeah, it's crazy that this was written in the 50s and I'm experiencing the same things today. The Bell Jar actually is my final book that I read in July, so let's get into the ones that I read in August. The first book that I read in August was Educated by Tara Westover. I listened to this one as an audiobook, and you know, I normally love listening to memoirs as audiobooks. I did that for Jeanette McCurdy's memoir. I did that for Michelle Zauner and Chanel Miller, who I'll talk about in a second. I love hearing authors read their stories to me, especially if it's a memoir. I thought going into this that Tara Westover was going to be narrating it, but it was someone else. Maybe that kind of hindered my experience a little bit. This is a memoir about Tara's experience growing up in a family that is a survivalist family. They thought that doomsday was coming. They thought that the government was going to come and take all of their children and that the world will end at the millennium and all that, and just how that kind of impacts a person's life. She never got a formal education growing up. She didn't even have a birth certificate. When she got older, she wanted to be educated. She wanted to go to college and leave home for the first time and live life away from her family. Her family was very abusive and really manipulative, so check trigger warnings if that's something that you're worried about. In the end, she does end up going to like Cambridge and all these great universities and getting educated, which is such a great story. It's really amazing that she was able to kind of pull herself out of that terrible family environment. Like I said earlier, with my kind of audiobook experience recently, I did listen to this one on audiobook, but I think that I might have liked it more if I had read it. I didn't really feel like I could grasp all of the elements of the story through the audiobook. I felt like she was missing something where she went from never setting foot in a classroom to studying at Harvard. I wish I saw that journey a little bit more. They do describe the journey, but it was not super fleshed out or honestly believable. I just wish I could have seen maybe more of her journey throughout that process and kind of see her development as a person when she goes to school. I think she just talks about like the classes and the scholarships she was able to get, but not really how that changed her as a person. Yeah, I just was left wishing for more information from that story. It was definitely interesting. It was really sad, but it's not my favorite memoir that I've ever read. I rated this one 3 stars. The next book that I read was The Island of Missing Trees. I was recommended this book at a local indie bookshop a long time ago, and the way that the bookseller described it to me was, this is like very, very broad, basically, it is Romeo and Juliet set in Greece. And yes, that's kind of true, but also I think that this story is so much more than this. This book follows two different timelines, one in the 70s during the civil war in Cyprus, where the Greek and the Turkish sides of the island are fighting against each other, and two teenagers from opposite sides of the island are in love, and in this forbidden love. The other timeline follows the now perspective of their daughter in London. I won't go into any more than that. I thought that this book was so good. It is so lyrical. I got the 5-star feeling from this book within the prologue. It's such an amazing story. It is so well researched as well. There is this kind of magical realism element to it, which I won't give away. This book has such a great foundation in science and also in history. If you're a naturalist or like anything botanical or anything to do with trees or even fruit really, you need to pick this one up. My favorite thing about this wasn't even the romance. It's more like a literary fiction with a little bit of romance in it, but my favorite part about this was the magical realism element of it and the narration. I thought that this was so good. If you like historical fiction, if you like romance, if you like literary fiction, if you like nature, this really appeals to every single person, I think. I rated it 5 stars. I think maybe looking back on it, I could lower it a little bit, but honestly, just thinking about the writing style of this book and just, oh god, no, I think it's gonna be a 5. Also, this fig is a big player in the book, and I thought it was hilarious that I went from the bell jar with its most famous part about the fig to this one, which is all about figs too, and the bell jar is even referenced in this one, which I thought was hilarious, and I read these essentially back to back. 2 different books about figs, both amazing, both 5 stars. Totally should read both. Also, what I said earlier about setting, the setting of this, I like needed to be in Greece immediately. Like I need to go to Greece. I have to. And I have to plant a fig tree in my garden now. This book is life-changing. The next book that I read was Iron Flame, which is the second book after Fourth Wing. I was disappointed. I think like everyone else was. There were still parts where I did like it and I liked where the story was going, but I thought that after the cliffhanger of the first book, I was so disappointed in the way that she developed that whole story. It was just so like, there and done. What the heck? And part 1 I thought was totally unnecessary. No need for that. Why did we do that? Part 2, a little better, but still I just didn't care. I was bored, you know, which was really unfortunate because I was glued to my Kindle with the first one. I read this one on my Kindle, but even then I was getting bored, so I switched to audiobook, which again, maybe I shouldn't have done that because I wasn't invested in the characters in this one at all. And also the main conflict within the love interests, hated it. Why even introduce a new conflict if you're not going to see it through? I thought that she just dropped it like 3/4 through the book and was so lazy with that. I thought it was, oh my god, it was terrible. I was like, why are we fighting? And then you're fighting and you're not even gonna go through with it? What was the point of that? Why did we care? The ending totally got me, though. I'm for sure gonna be reading the next one, which is unfortunate because, you know, if she's gonna keep doing that with the whole cliffhanger ending, like, I guess I'm gonna have to read all the 5 books. And I don't know how she's gonna go to the next one with this ending. I did this one 3 stars. It could be lower just because I was so not invested, but I did like some aspects of it. I think that she developed some things good, other things terribly. Terrible. And I want to see if she's going to redeem herself in the next one. The next one that I read was Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. This was so good. This is my first book that I've read by him, and you know, I am addicted. All that I want to do is read his books. His writing style is hilarious. This book is about a bank robbery that goes wrong and it turns into a hostage situation instead, but not at the bank, at an open house across the street. And I'll kind of leave it at that because I think it's really, really nice to go in blind. You're following this entire cast of characters, which I loved all of them. They're so cute and quirky. I love the way that he wrote this. He is really funny with the way that he like narrates this. He's kind of like talking to you, the reader, which I thought was so funny. And the way that he would go about this story, it's not a linear timeline. He'll introduce something to you in the beginning and then be like, okay, forget about that, and not reveal what the cause or what the effect was to that until like halfway into the book or something like that. And it's just these little pieces of information are just slowly weaving together until you get to literally the last page. And I thought it was amazing. Totally like thought inspiring as well. It's not just this silly little read, it's something deeper, and I thought it was amazing. I think that this is a 4 or a 4.5. I don't know. I don't think that this is a 5. That felt like something was missing a little bit, but it was so good. I think 4.5. Yeah, so good. The next one that I read was The Binko Parlor. I've had this on my shelf for so long, just haven't read it. This is such a cute little quick, first of all, cute, adorable, quick read though, because it's only 164 pages. The text is huge, and the chapters are so short. I read this, I think, in like a night or two. In this book, you're following Claire, who goes to Japan to visit her grandparents, and while she's there, she doesn't really have anything going on, so she becomes a tutor for this girl who she's teaching French to, and she's hanging out with her grandparents, and she's really doing a whole lot of nothing. This is her first time visiting them without any of her family members or her partner, so it's just her kind of being alone and feeling lonely in this place where you're supposed to be surrounded by friends and family. Not much happens, and I didn't feel super connected to the characters, but I loved the setting and the atmosphere of this book. It's set in Japan, in Tokyo, in the late summer, and just the summer heat and the summer kind of end of summer melancholy. And I love Japan. I have been there once, just to the airport, which is really unfortunate because I want to visit there so bad. And yeah, I think really the setting is what did it for me. I was also really interested to hear about what pachinko is. I've never heard of that before this book, and you know it's about. It's titled The Binko Parlor, but it's such like an interesting piece of culture that I've never heard of before, and I thought that was really cool, kind of diving into that. It was just a quick little easy read, not my favorite thing I've ever read, but also not bad at all, so I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read was Yellow Face by R.F. Kuang. I am so obsessed with this book. I devoured it. I read it in like a day or two. It's just so good and crazy and funny and satirical. This book is about June, who is a white woman and an author who is friends with another author named Athena, who is Asian American. And Athena is wildly successful, so much more successful than June, and June is jealous of that. One day when they're hanging out, this isn't a spoiler, this happens in the first chapter and it's on the description, but while they're hanging out, Athena dies. And during this whole fiasco, during the craziness of it, June steals Athena's new manuscript for her new novel. And June publishes it as her own, which is incredibly problematic. She does these things that are just not right. And you're thinking the whole time reading this, like, you're such an idiot. Why would you do this? Why would you do this? Why would you do this? This quote on the back, I think, really sums up the book. Reading Yellow Face felt like being inside a wild, brutal, psychological knife fight with a deranged clown. A merciless satire that left me screaming inside from both its horror and humor. And that's from Constance Wu, who is the star in Crazy Rich Asians. And I love that movie. But yeah, it's so true. June is like literally just a crazy bitch. She makes all these terrible choices and so just wrong choices. And yeah, she is a deranged clown. And yeah, while you're reading this, you feel like you're in a knife fight because you're like, why would you do this? And you're in your right mind, why would you do that? It was hilarious. It was so meta. I've never read a book kind of like that. I love this one. I rated this one 4 originally, I think. I have just been thinking about this book so much that I think I might bump it up to a 4.5. The reason why it's not a 5, I feel like something was missing. The author spends a lot of time talking about like the book and publishing industry, which was super interesting. And I think a lot of people don't like that about this book, but I've never read anything about it. So it was cool kind of getting that background knowledge. But I think that she uses that as the way for this character to kind of become crazy a bit too much. Like you don't really get too much of her emotions. I do wish I got just like a little bit more leading up to the end with her whole emotional roller coaster a little bit. I thought like, I don't know, it's so good, but I just didn't get that 5-star feeling, even though I think about it all the time. The next one that I read is Cersei by Madeline Miller. This copy is like nasty. I need to get a new one. But this is Madeline Miller's second book. She also wrote The Song of Achilles, which I read a few years ago, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. So I was always afraid of going into this one because I thought it was going to be the same sort of thing. Like I thought that her writing style maybe just wasn't for me, but no, this book was for me. These two books are up for my favorite of the year. This follows the Greek goddess Cersei, who is in the beginning of her life living with her family, but they don't really get along, and she does something where the gods are unhappy with her and they banish her to a abandoned island where she lives. She discovers her powers of witchcraft, and yeah, it just follows all the people that kind of come to her island and also come to her, and all the different stories that she is connected with over the thousands and thousands of years that she is living. I thought that this was so good. I think that the reason why I didn't like Song of Achilles was because I didn't really feel super invested with the story and that specific myth, like the myth of Achilles. And this one, I didn't even know of who Cersei was before, but all of the different like secondary cast of characters in this book, I know everything about them just because of my like obsession with Greek mythology as a kid. And this was so nostalgic for me. And the whole time I was reading this, I was like, oh my God, this is a person I know. This is a person I know. I know your story. I know your story. Hold on. Really? Because of this one book. Let me grab it. This book. Did y'all read these? Because this was like my childhood. There were so many different stories that were in this one that were in Cersei compared to Song of Achilles. That's just one of the stories that was in here. And oh my God, I am obsessed. I'm obsessed. I love her witchcraft and her living on the island and her discovery of herself, and I love all the different relationships that she forms with other people and other gods and everything. And I just thought it was so, so good. So atmospheric too. I had this sitting on my shelf for years. I think I got this for like $1 at Goodwill, and I was just so intimidated by it because of my experience with Song of Achilles, and I just let it sit, and literally one of my favorite books now. I cried at the end. I love Cersei. I don't know if this is for everyone. I do think that her writing in this one is a little bit more digestible than, or accessible than Song of Achilles, and I'm just so excited to keep reading Madeline Miller's books because I think she just does such a good job of making these stories believable. Like this is a fictional take on Cersei, who is a myth, but I totally read this being like, oh my God, this totally happened. I just feel so connected to Cersei now. And I think that that is such a talent to have. Madeline Miller is so talented. The last book that I read in August was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. And I read this one via audiobook through my library. The author, Chanel Miller, narrates it. It was so good. This book is a memoir about Chanel Miller's experience as a sexual assault victim. So if you are someone who is sensitive to that topic or are a victim, I think you should maybe be cautious going into this one just because it is really triggering. But I think that her story is so amazing and inspirational, and she just has a way with words that makes you feel empowered, and almost like this book was like a call to action kind of because of her experience and the way that she wrote about it. She was sexually assaulted on Stanford's campus, and her case was highly publicized, but she remained anonymous throughout the case, and I think a long time after. Her victim statement that she wrote and read in court was published by BuzzFeed and it went viral. And she was anonymous at the time, but this book is her claiming her story and claiming her identity and telling the world that you should know her name and not the fake name or just anonymous that she used in court. I think it is really important that everyone should read it if you're able to kind of push through that, because Chanel's writing is just so amazing, and she talks about the injustices of the American justice system and kind of her healing process and her accepting this new life. Her story was just so kind of famous that it really changed the way that sexual assault cases are handled now, which is so valuable. And yeah, I thought it was just an amazing, amazing read. She's such a good author and narrator. My issue earlier with audiobooks was that I couldn't really feel connected to the characters or connected to the story or something, but this was not the case for this book. Normally when I listen to audiobooks, I like to do something else. Like, that's kind of why I have the audiobook on and playing, but this one I couldn't do anything else. I was so focused on the story that I had to just sit there and listen to her tell her story. It was so gripping and so just, it's so, so, so good. Automatic 5 stars, amazing, and totally moving. I think this book will stick with me for literally forever. I cried so hard at so many points of this book. I think everyone should read it. So good. Those are all of the books that I read in July and August. I think there was a total of 15 books throughout the 2 months, which is super awesome. I loved so many of those books. Nothing below 3 stars, I think. Anything below 3 stars I don't like, which is so nice because I've liked all the books that I've read so far and read recently. Such an awesome reading summer, and I'm so excited to go into my fall books. And if you haven't already, go and watch my fall TBR and my September TBR, because I'm so excited about those books too. I think that we're gonna do some more great reading months because I had such a good time in July and August. So many 5 stars, and I think we'll keep that ball rolling into September and into fall. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.